You're listening to the Minimalist Podcast with Joshua Fields Milburn and TK Coleman.
Thank you, Malabama. Hello, everybody. Today on the show, we are joined by Cal Newport, a professor of computer science at Georgetown, where he is also a founding member of the Center for Digital Ethics. Cal is a New York Times bestselling author who writes about the intersection of technology, productivity, and culture. His latest book is called Slow Productivity. Coming up on this free public minimal episode, a caller has a question about the modern need to be busy and productive in the workplace. Then we've got a different kind of lightning round segment today. Cal is going to try to convince the minimalists that we should quit social media. We've also got an interesting listener tip for you. You can check out the full Maximal edition of episode 435, where we answer 5 times the questions and we dive deep into several simple living segments. That private podcast episode is out right now at patreon.com/The Minimalists. Your support keeps our podcast 100% advertisement free because, say it with me, y'all, advertisements suck. Let's start with our callers. If you have a question or a comment for our show, we'd love to hear from you. Give us a call, 406-219-7839, or email a voice recording right from your phone to podcast@theminimalists.com. Our first question today is from Sandra.
Hi, Joshua, Ryan, and TK. This is Sandra reaching out from San Jose, California. And I want to let you guys know that your work has been life-changing for me. And I really appreciate all that you do for your listeners and readers. I also have tickets to your tour stop in San Francisco. So July just can't come fast enough for me. Today, I want to share something that I've been seeing happening more and more these days. People seem to be hooked on what I call a perpetual cycle of problem and solution finding. At work, we strive to be problem solvers or problem anticipators. For doing so, we are perceived as high-value workers and having power of influence, and our employers recognize and reward us for it. Even at times when there weren't any inherent problems to be solved, we are conditioned to seek and solve and create value at all times. It almost has become a crucial way of gaining our sense of value or worth. I'm also seeing this happening outside the workplace, just about anywhere these days. I mean, who doesn't want to have strong problem-solving skills? But have we become an over-solving, problem-maximizing economy? Is there such a thing as a tipping point for a solution culture? Would love to get your thoughts on this. Thanks.
Cal Newport, I'd love to start with you.
Sure.
I want to talk about some of the principles in your new book, Slow Productivity. In fact, there are sort of 3 principles of slow productivity. Before we do that, though, I think her question is about problem solving, which quite often has to do with productivity in general.
Yes.
Can you broadly define what we mean when we talk about productivity?
Well, I think her question gets to the core problem about productivity, which is we don't have a good definition. And this is the whole motivation when I was writing this book, is that I went out and surveyed a bunch of my readers and I asked them a simple question. What does it mean to be productive? No one had an answer. Right? I mean, they were describing essentially their jobs, right? There's a lot of like, well, to do like my job. They're describing their job, but they didn't have a good definition of like, how do we measure if you're productive or not productive? And I think this is really the problem. So what happens is we end up using activity, visible activity, as a proxy for doing something useful.
Busyness.
And I think that is what Sandra's picking up on. Problem solving is very activity-based. It's, okay, I can be on an email chain, I can be in a Slack thread. Hey, I look at this issue here, I think I have a solution. You're leaving a digital breadcrumb trail of your activity, and it all sort of gives an appearance, a performance of, I'm being productive. But it's quite different than another definition of productivity, which would be one based on useful output. Like, I produced this thing this year, that's really great, and it's cool and is valuable, and I'm proud of it, right? That's the type of definition that we as humans want the drift towards. And I think what we're stuck with right now without that is, let's just be visibly active. I think that's what she means by problem-solving culture, is I'm always chiming in. I can point out an issue. I can give a solution. It doesn't matter if that's important. It's visible. And that's the game I think she's seen people playing.
we're searching for problems that don't exist because human beings are problem-solving machines quite often, right?
Yeah.
Because real problems do exist when we don't have one in front of us, especially in a workplace where being busy is valued. In fact, it's considered a virtue.
Sure.
What happens is we start looking for problems that might not exist and therefore creating, or at least accidentally creating problems.
Yeah. You become an email warrior. Yeah. Okay. So if I'm finding problems, that's going to generate a lot of messages, and I can be involved in these threads. And let me just chime in here, and I can use the jargon of like, hey, let me just hop in here, and I want to plus one what Sandra just said there. But we can always hop on a call to synergize on what's going on with these hybrid activities. You get all the jargon, and it looks like, oh man, you're hard charging. Look at that. You're in there. You're finding these things that are going on. Now compare that to I'm working on a product advertising strategy. You know what? I'm just sitting here working on it. And it's going to take me a couple weeks. You're not going to hear from me for a couple weeks. That's really terrifying because as far as your bosses know, like you're just listening to Minimalists podcast, right? They don't know what you're doing, right? So it feels much more comfortable to be visibly active. And so problem solving, I think, is a way to always sort of be in that digital mix. And of course, this is the problem we have to solve is get a definition of productivity that avoids all that. That's sort of the whole challenge of slow productivity. It's a hard challenge, but I think Sandra is picking up exactly what's affecting a lot of people.
Well, let's talk about those 3 principles of slow productivity.
Yeah. So slow productivity, let's think of it as an alternative to busyness, as a proxy for productivity. So how else might we define productivity if we don't want it just to be how visibly active am I doing work? So we had in the 3 principles, do fewer things, which terrifies people. Work at a natural pace. Not so terrifying, but people are, can I get away with that? And then 3, obsess over quality. It's an alternative way of thinking about productive that I argue is much more aligned with our humanity. It's sustainable. It's meaningful. It produces really good stuff as well. So it's going to be impactful. Those 3 things, I think, is a lot more human way to get at productivity.
I do want to talk about doing fewer things, but I want to circle around that. I want to sort of highlight the last one there, and that is the obsess over quality. And in the book, you talk about impressive quality.
Yeah.
And I want to caution people, though. I don't think you mean try to impress other people with that. It's, am I impressed by the work? Am I satisfied by the work that I'm doing? Is that a fair distinction?
Yeah, that you're continually trying to evolve your own sense of taste. So you're becoming more sophisticated in your understanding of what good means in whatever it is you do. So as that definition of what good means gets more sophisticated, the gap between that and where you currently are grows. And then you do effort to fill the gap. And then you make that more sophisticated. Then you fill the gap. And that's how people get better. And it has very little to do with people being impressed, as it does with this is going to make your work meaningful. But also, I call that principle the glue for everything else. It makes everything else possible. So if you get good at something and continue to get good at something that's valuable, slowness is going to become a necessity, right? You look at people who are very good at things, they don't want to be busy. To be busy gets in the way of doing that thing really good. So suddenly, slowness, doing fewer things, working at a natural pace, is no longer something that you're having to impose with great difficulty. It seems the only natural thing you can do. And then 2, as you get better at things, you gain more leverage over your own working life because you're good and you have leverage in the marketplace, and you can apply that leverage to slow things down even more. It's, one of the stories I tell in the book is about Jewel, the music, star, of course. After she got
Not the Vapor? Not
the Vapor.
Okay, I thought it was the company.
Well,
which is a sponsor of this podcast.
Oh, gosh.
Yeah, this is right. Advertisers suck, except for our sponsor, Jewel Vape Ins. Yeah. That'd be a hard turn, guys. I don't know about that.
That'd be a pretty hard turn.
I got to get that bag, TK.
You got it well. And you have to be on camera vaping 2 minutes out of every episode. That's the contract. Sorry, Joshua, I was just enjoying the smooth, cool electric flavor.
That was pretty good.
Sorry, I've totally derailed you.
Different Jewel.
Yeah.
Different Jewel. Her career takes off. She goes on international tour, comes back from the international tour, and like, okay, you got to do the Hollywood thing too. So they move her here. She's in a Ang Lee film, The Devil's Backbone, and her representation is like, this is the playbook. It's going to be like a Taylor Swift playbook. International tours in between Hollywood, right? So we're going to do movies in between international tours. And she said, well, wait a second. I'm kind of rich now. I don't want to do that. I want to write music. Never did international tour again. Never did another movie again. She's like, no, I don't want to do that. I'm going to write music and put out albums. By being really good, she was able to take control of that. So the obsession over quality makes everything else possible if you want to slow down.
But then the opposite for someone else might be true. They really enjoy the touring aspect of it.
Yeah.
And so what you're talking about is doing fewer things so you can do the things that you enjoy.
Yeah. So if we take Taylor Swift as the other example, she went all in on the touring. Like, I'm going to be the best tour show that has ever existed. She's not doing a lot of movies. She's not starting. She doesn't have a fitness app. I mean, maybe she does. I don't know. But, there's all these things you could do. She's like, no, this is the thing she wanted to do, is be the best touring star that there'd ever been. Yeah. So you focus on what you want to do well. Slowness just becomes inevitable, So that principle is last, but it almost sort of showed to be first. I start with the fireworks, like do fewer things and, you'll be okay. Like you can cross off half your to-do list and it's going to be okay. And here's why. And that's all exciting. But the obsession over quality is really what makes it all work.
What's fascinating is there seems to be this direct connection between being free from busyness and choosing to prioritize what's interesting and inspiring for you over what's impressive to other people. Because busy is a powerful social signal. And the moment I need to be impressive, that means I need to look productive to other people. And when I'm busy, man, even if my results aren't great, you can't question the fact that TK really is trying.
Yep.
He really is working hard. You give him the benefit of the doubt when the results fall up short. But when you take away that busyness, you don't have that social signal. And so you kind of have to create something that matters to you.
You have to. Well, and it's a social signal and it's less scary. So like the other thing that makes busyness so attractive is that it's less scary than going for something that you really care about. Because you can't really fail at busyness. Like you're going to succeed at looking busy if you want to be busy, right? I mean, you're going to send emails, you're going to jump on Zoom. So where I saw this, it was kind of an unusual place to witness this up close. I'm a computer scientist at graduate school, right? So I got my doctorate at MIT in the theory group, which is like scary, right? It's a big monster minds like walking around and you feel like you're, a kindergartner, right? Yeah. People had different reactions to this. And a common thing that would happen, this was a common trope in any elite sort of science-based graduate school, is that certain students would be so intimidated by the task of, you got to just write a really good research paper and it's going to be objectively judged and it has to get accepted into a place where it's hard to get accepted. And all these monster minds are going to know if it's good or bad. That was so scary that you had a subset of students that instead went into busyness mode. And you would see it right away in grad school. The students that had all these things going on, and they're very harried, and they were jumping into all these clubs and activities, and were always, oh my God, I have so much going on. You would know immediately, okay, that student's not going to make it through. Because they were using the busyness as a way to avoid the hard thing, which didn't require busyness. You might write 2 papers a year. Like you're spending most of your time staring at whiteboards and just trying to solve things. And so I think that happens in the economy writ large. Busyness is less scary.
It's a safe place to hide.
I'm going to succeed at being busy. I might not succeed at this thing I care about.
You can't fail at being busy is one of the best maxims I've heard all year.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Tweet that, Professor Sean. Or maybe don't tweet it. We'll figure this out later. Are we Xing it now? I'm not sure.
Put it in the town square.
You're going to talk us out of social media here in a bit. Before we move on to that, though, I do want to stop and talk about working at a natural pace. And I like in the book that sometimes working at a natural pace apes the form of busyness. I think you talk about Jack Kerouac riding on the road over a 3-week period. And it was almost manic or frantic, right? Yeah. But that is not a sustainable pace. It's almost peaks and valleys there. Can you expand on that a bit?
This was actually my way into the whole philosophy of slow productivity. The thing that got me started down this path was encountering the lives of people who we think of historically as being super productive. So great scientists, also great writers. These are the first examples I had. And then reading about these people, so reading about Newton or Galileo, but also more contemporaries like John McPhee was another one of these examples early on. Day to day, they looked lazy by pseudo-productivity standards, right? This stuff took a long time, right? I mean, John McPhee, I opened my book on a story of John McPhee laying on a picnic table in his backyard for 5 days. 5 days just laying there trying to figure out, he's writing this big New Yorker article about the Pine Barrens and was just trying to figure out, how do I take all this research? He couldn't find his way into the article, so he laid on a table for 5 days. If we zoomed into one of those days with our 2024 minds, like, this is the laziest guy I've seen. He's not doing anything. He's just laying there. But then you zoom out and say, oh, he's written 29 books. There's a Pulitzer, 2 finalists for National Book Award, peerless in his contributions to the New Yorker. In his class at Princeton, he trained like the whole next generation of writers. So of course he's super productive. But when you zoom in on the day-to-day, sometimes he was doing nothing. The great scientists were like this as well. I was surprised by how long it would take for them to have the insight of something they were famous for and then actually write that up and publish it.
We're talking over a decade sometimes.
Over decades, yes. Like Galileo, he measured the swinging lights in the cathedral with his pulse because they didn't have a watch. And that's where he figured out pendulum motion, conservation of pendulum motion. It was almost a decade later that he got around to writing that up. Newton held on to the core insights about the inverse square law of gravity until pretty late in his life, when finally he heard, Leibniz is sort of coming along and doing something similar. Decades later, he wrote that up. Darwin, decades after he had the central insights, wrote it up. Galileo had a really active life and engagement in the arts. He played the lute and enjoyed poetry and theater, and they just took their time. They took their time. Marie Curie was another example. Hot on the discovery of her theory of radioactivity that would earn her the first of 2 Nobel. She won 2 Nobel Prizes, 2 different fields. Hot on about to get this discovery, right? She's studying a substance called pitchblende and isolating out of it radium. She's going to get a Nobel Prize for this. Goes on a 2-month vacation with her family. She's like, well, let's go. It's summer. Let's go take some time. Let's go recharge. Like, by the busyness standards of modern times, we're like, this is what a waste of productivity. But these were the most productive people of history. 2 Nobel Prizes. I mean, if that's not productive, what is? 2 months off for vacation in like the heart of her tracking this down. So the natural pace idea that people in times past to produce great things did not work 9 to 5 shifts, 5 days a week, 12 months a year. That's factory. That's a factory model. It's not the natural pace for how the human mind does cognitive work. And so we've stuck ourselves in this invisible factory model because it's what was convenient when knowledge work became a thing. Like, well, this is what the factories are doing, so let's do the same thing. We should have a work day, and we should just work all day, and you should be intense all day and don't slack off and just do this year round. But we forgot that the factory model was the artificial thing. Like, when that came along, it did not play well with humans. Like, we had to invent labor unions and whole regulatory frameworks because this was such a unnatural way to work that we had to sort of protect people from how hard it was. But then when knowledge work comes along, we're like, let's just do that.
And so the do fewer things thing sounds really nice.
Yeah.
But I'm putting myself in the shoes of the average listener, or the headphones of the average listener here. And I imagine they're like, oh, wow, that sounds great. Yeah, do fewer things. Tell that to my boss.
Oh, goodness.
Yeah. So if I add 2 more words to that principle, people have a lot easier time with it. So I'm going to add two extra words that's going to clarify it. Do fewer things at once.
Ooh.
Right? Fewer things at once will probably end up you accomplishing more things overall. Right? So there's actually a sort of inversion going on here. Doing fewer things at the same time means the rate at which you actually finish things is going to go up. Now, I don't want to just harp on that. I have this whole interlude in the book where I say, but that's not what this is all about. This is not all about just sort of stealth productivity, that if you do fewer things at once, you're going to be more productive overall. That's not the point. The point is having too much on your plate at the same time is also inhuman. It's very stressful. It's not sustainable. But it is going to produce more things, which means it's not going to be that hard to get away with because actually your boss is going to be impressed. Like, hey, TK, like, you did a lot this year. Like, the things are going really well. Because here's what happens, and here's my whole argument for why this makes sense. When you say yes to something, it brings with it administrative overhead. Like, whether you're ready to work on it or not, once you've agreed on something, there's going to be emails you have to send. People are going to ask you about it. You might have those dreaded standing meetings, like, okay, every week, let's have the meeting, let's check in. I call it overhead tax in the book. If you say yes to too many things, they each bring their own overhead tax. This takes up more and more of your day. And not just in terms of raw time, but in terms of fragmentation. So these emails and meetings are distributed throughout your day, so you have less and less uninterrupted time. Your ability then to accomplish anything goes down. You have less time to actually do work, and the time you have is more fragmented. So now the amount of stuff you're getting done is pretty small because most of your time is actually jumping back and forth doing the administrative overhead with what's on your plate. So if you instead say, no, I'm only bringing 2 things on my plate at a time, you get them done pretty quick. Because now most of your day is actually working on the things, not talking about things. And then those things get done pretty quick, and you could bring something else onto your plate and that gets done pretty quick. And this is way more sustainable. There's nothing more deranging than having a day where almost all of your time is spent talking about work. And because of that, you can't finish what's on your plate. And because of that, you fall behind. And because of that, more things come onto your plate and the whole thing gets worse. We see this all the time. And about twice a year, you have to declare basically burnout bankruptcy. Like, all right, uncle, right? And then you get out of a lot of things by very vocally saying, I'm completely crushed and burnt out. It's deranging. You're sitting there during your day saying, I can't get to anything because all we have all day is meetings about these things because I have too many things on my plate. It's really not a sensible way to actually organize cognitive effort. So fewer things at once.
How do we get here with all the standing meetings? I mean, that is the status quo. And so many people feel more productive. So many companies feel like they're doing the right thing. How did we get there?
Well, standing meetings I have a particular issue with because to me, a standing meeting is an admission of I have no real way of organizing myself for my time. The only thing I actually trust is my calendar. If I have a meeting on my calendar, it's the one thing I look at every day and I'll go to that meeting. So people use standing meetings as a stand-in for having a more sophisticated ability to control their time and attention. Like I want to feel better that I'm not going to forget this. So let's put a meeting on the calendar every week. I go to meetings. I look at my calendar. It's the one system I trust. And so these begin to proliferate. But the bigger problem is there is, especially in knowledge work and creative knowledge work, we don't have any explicit system for workload management. Other fields have this. Here's how many things you should be working on. It shouldn't be more than that. What are you working on? Here it is. We have it listed up on some board. We have some methodology about figuring out how to choose what to work on next. We don't do this in knowledge work. It's up to individuals to just say yes or no. Often in socially fraught dynamics of, I don't want to say no to someone who's my boss, or they might think that I'm loafing. It's this really complicated setup. We have no way of tracking how much work people are doing. And so what people default to is using a heuristic of, I will wait until I'm so stressed about my workload that I feel like that stress gives me permission to say no. It justifies saying no. And until I feel really stressed about my workload, I'm just going to feel in an interpersonal sense guilty about saying no, this is social capital I'm spending. And so people just wait until they're overloaded to start putting the governor on how much comes in. And so everyone just remains 20% overloaded.
One more. I got it. I got to get this. When you say do fewer things, one objection could be tell that to my boss. Another objection could be tell that to my doubting self. When you work in an unorthodox way, it invites a lot of questions and scrutiny from other people. But what about the questions we ask ourselves? Like, if I'm John McPhee and I'm on day 4 now of lying on the picnic table thinking up ideas, maybe I should just force myself to get up and do something productive. How do you deal with that?
Yeah, well, so McPhee had experience by then. So he knew, okay, this is how this goes. Like, I'm going to break this soon. I knew it's coming. But I think the bigger picture, the other question there is key though, right? Like, how do you convince other people? And one of the things I argue is don't make a big show about it. Just start. What we don't realize is we say no to a lot of things, right? I mean, if we just said yes to everything that came our way, we would have 40 hours of work a day, right? So we say no a lot. So all you're really doing is moving that line, that threshold of when you start saying no. From the perspective of the outsiders who are bringing stuff in, they don't know the difference. So if we imagine you're kind of like a closed system, and all I know, and I'm going to use some science geekery here, if I'm on the outside of this closed system, all I know is like I ask you to do things, sometimes you say yes and sometimes you say no. But I don't know what's going on with other people and how often you're saying yes or no to them. I mean, in other words, I can't estimate what's your threshold, what's your workload. So if you change that, I don't notice that. I'm just like, hey, sometimes I ask you to do things, you say yes, sometimes you say no. I don't necessarily notice that you've subtly kept that workload smaller. Now, I have a bunch of practical things you could do as well. Quotas, having, this is a favorite of people, transparent workloads. Here's a shared document. Here's what I'm working on now. here's the queue of things I've agreed to. And when someone says, hey, can you do this? You say, yeah, just go add it to my work document and just make sure that I have the information I need. And now they have to confront, oh, this is what, like TK's actually working on. And here's the 3 things he's working on now. And there's 7 things he's waiting to work on. And I'm putting this as number 8. And it's a reality check for them of, you have a lot going on. It's going to be a while till you get to this. And it's not you being lazy. It's not procrastination. I can see what your workload actually is. So sometimes just being transparent about your workload enables you to actually be a lot more sane about it as well.
We got a lot more of slow productivity to talk about. Sandra, thank you so much for your question. We'll see you at the San Francisco tour stop of the Everything Tour. It's our 11th tour. Nicodemus will be there for that stop. We've been really enjoying this tour. It's our first free tour since 2015.
Ooh.
It's a 10th anniversary of our book, Everything That Remains. Remember, we moved to that cabin in the middle of nowhere.
Remember.
It was a very deep work sort of thing to do.
Jen and I think that tour, did you come through DC? I remember Politics and Prose. I think I introduced you guys.
Yeah.
Okay.
And so this is the 10th anniversary. We're doing 7 tour stops all throughout California, LA, San Diego, Orange County, Fresno, et cetera, et cetera. You can get tickets. They're free, but you have to register at theminimalists.com/tour. We'd love to see you there. Before we get back to our callers, Alabama, what time is it?
You know what time it is. It's time for the lightning round, where we answer your questions from TikTok.
Yes, indeed. You can follow The Minimalists on TikTok, Instagram, Facebook, X, and Threads. We are at The Minimalists on all of those platforms. Now, Cal, usually during the lightning round, what we do is we try to answer people's questions with a short, shareable, less than 140 character response. We call them minimal maxims, but not today. That's not what we're doing today, so don't worry. Today, I wanted to do something different because we have Cal Newport here. And so instead of answering a social media question like we typically would and giving them a tweetable answer, which we put in the show notes that we'll send to your inbox every Monday for free at theminimalists.email. We also put all these minimal maxims over at minimalmaxims.com so you can copy and share those pithy answers if you'd like. Well, we have a question today from Dave about social media.
You guys post a lot of content on social media. Would it make sense for the minimalists to minimize social media?
Now, Cal, let me give you some context here. Last year was our most successful year on social media. And I think I owe a lot of that to Professor Sean. When Jessica left the team, Social Jess, she had a kid and she's like, I want to become a full-time mom. I no longer want to do the social media thing. I don't want to work a full-time job. And so Sean took over her duties. And ironically, we removed like 70-80% of the stuff we were doing on social media. But it was our most, quote unquote, successful year.
Measured in terms of what?
Exactly.
Okay. All right.
So measured in terms of, we reached over 4 million followers on social media across all platforms. That was up from like 2.9 just a year previous to that. We had over 200 million views on social media across all platforms and 500 million impressions. So this is more reach than both of our Netflix films combined over a multiple year period, right? And so that's one way to measure it. However, Cal, as the author of Digital Minimalism, can you please state your case on why you think the minimalist would benefit from leaving social media altogether?
So what's happening on these social channels? Because as someone who doesn't use social media, I'll admit, I don't have a good understanding of the social media footprint of the minimalist. It's like, what would I see if I'm on TikTok versus Twitter versus Instagram? Is it clips?
Yeah, they're all relatively uniform. Every day we post a new video from the podcast.
Yeah.
And so it's usually a 60 to 90 second clip. Many of them get shared really broadly and get millions and millions of views, some of them hundreds of thousands. And so every day there's a new clip.
Now, is it, when you say we, this is Sean?
Well, it's Danny making the TikTok videos. It's Sean transcribing them. It's all the whole team making selections from the podcast and say, okay, you know what, we're gonna tweeze out 7 videos this week from the most recent podcast episode.
Now, do you or TK ever have to go on and interact with people on these channels as well, or is this more a content push?
We don't interact with them directly, typically.
Yeah.
Although we do interact with them indirectly. Sean will send us any questions or things we have, although Sean's gotten really good at responding to them. At one point, we had hired someone to respond to comments and things like that.
Yeah.
That's separate from our personal social media, which is we use as a more personal vehicle.
Yeah.
But yeah, this is more... I guess what you just said, content distribution, even though I hate that word content.
All right, so here's my digital minimalist response to this. I don't mind it. So in digital minimalism...
Wait a minute, he's supposed to talk us out of social media today.
You guys aren't doing anything on it.
This is like reverse psychology.
No, but we're talking about the official minimalist social media channels, which you don't touch and you don't touch. So... this isn't changing your lives. Sean is the one who's upset about this.
Exactly. I touch it. I hate it. I abhor it.
Sean, can we hear what you hate about it?
It's destroying my literal soul, and I don't believe in souls. I used to, but I don't have one anymore because of the social media. So
Is it the seeing what people say this, or seeing the other stuff that's on there? What's destroying your soul?
Yeah, it's seeing the other stuff because there's no way to avoid that. There are on some platforms. There on some platforms I can schedule things out a week in advance and then not touch it, but I can't do that on every platform. So I'm engaged every single day, and it's impossible to avoid at least something. And it's often awful, or when it's not awful, that's even worse because then it sucks you in.
Yeah. Well, okay. So I'm going to use this. So I'm going to give you two answers. So the answer that I don't mind it is from the digital minimalist perspective of, is the technology getting in the way of the things that you value? So for, let's say, the host of the Minimalist Show, you say, this is getting our content out to an audience who cares about us. It's not something that's taking a big time out of your day. It's taking no time out of your day, actually, right? And there's a lot of businesses who do this, who I put out, I'm thinking like Ryan Holiday with his Stoic quotes on Twitter or something like this. It's putting stuff out, but it's not me being on there. All right, here's the argument against. Think about your audience. So if they really like you and the social media, they're going to go on social media because you're putting out good stuff. They're going to have Sean's experience of, I'm on here to see a great minimalist maxim, which actually does uplift me. And next to it is just, garbage fires. And then I look up 20 minutes later and I'm in a smelly fire. Like the whole thing has taken over. So there's maybe an ethical argument thinking about your audience for them to engage in it, you're pulling them into it. But now let me contradict myself. You might say, yeah, but we're finding new audience that way. And then once they're pulled into our world, things get better. So it does get complicated. So in general, I'm not completely against businesses putting out content on social media. Where it gets to people is when you have to interact on it. Once you have to be in the world and see the stuff, it's soul deadening.
Right, but aren't we encouraging the interaction then?
Yeah.
And are we adding... Here's the thought I have. Are we feeding people's desire and need for purpose and meaning, or are we simply feeding the algorithm?
See, it could be a wash, right? I mean, it could be your content is helping people towards that goal, but the social media experience that surrounds it is pushing them away from it.
Wow.
So it could be a wash.
Okay, for me, I enjoy being on social media a little bit in the sense that I like discovering ideas and I like sharing ideas. The psychological overhead feels really high for me because, like Professor Sean, when I go on there, just the garbage dumpster just gets into my soul and I almost always feel like I regret it. It's like enjoying a delicious meal that you kind of know you probably shouldn't be eating, and it feels great when you're having it. And then afterwards, you're just kind of bloated and you're like, oh man, I got to do better next time. Mm. Social media feels like that for me. But I'm not entirely convinced that I can have impact. I can be a force for good in the way that I want to be, or I can create value if I ignore that world, because it seems like this is the world we live in now, where if you want to do good, you want to make an impact, you need to be on there.
Well, let me tell you what I like about what you are doing. So I'm a big internet booster, and I'm very suspicious of social media. And I don't like those two being conflated. I think the internet is this fantastic thing where it's a common set of protocols that anyone can use to talk to anyone else. Everyone is equal. Then social media platforms come along and say, we want to build our own private versions of the internet where you just interact through us and we control it and we can monetize all of your eyeballs. The stuff you're doing with the podcast, this is old school internet. So you're using the internet to reach people and not just quickly to have an hour and a half, you in their ears hearing this, week after week. You hear it in the callers who call in. This is like very meaningful to them. That's impact. And it's leveraging the internet and the world we live in to reach people with something that's really high quality and can change their lives. And so the question is, does using the internet to be transformative have to involve playing ball with these 3 or 4 companies? And it's not that it's an obvious answer, but it's not obviously yes either.
So let me ask you this then. If I were just to switch it around and say, well, why don't you do the same thing and distribute your podcast, Deep Questions, and your blog and anything else you create on social media in a way that we've been using it? There could be, the Deep Questions brand on TikTok and Instagram. Yeah. Why haven't you gone that route if you're like, well, the Minimalist, they use it pretty well. Well, why don't you do that?
One of the roles I think I serve in internet culture is showing that it's possible not to be using the platforms. And I think that's really important because there's a lot of people who really they're not in your situation. They're not in the situation of, I have this really well-known brand with a giant audience and we have to navigate through how do we actually reach our audience. A lot of people, they're just on this a lot. They don't like it, but it just feels like I need to be on these services. So to have someone who's relatively well-known that says, well, I don't use these, makes that option valid.
Yeah.
And this is positive deviance theory, right? That when you want to change there's a conformist culture, and the problem is the sense of pressure that everyone has to do something. The solution is not to change everybody's mind. The solution is often to have 10% of people agree not to do it, and then it validates the choice. And this has been coming up a lot recently with concerns about young people in social media. And there's a lot of pushback. Parents are very worried. They say, look, I don't want my kid to be the only 12-year-old who doesn't have a smartphone. And so unless we ban smartphones in this classroom, like, what can I do? And there's been a lot of research now that says, well, no, you don't have to ban the smartphones in the class. You need like 10% of the class to agree not to use them. Now you validated that option for the people for which that's going to be really important. And so I play that role partially for people out there that say, I really don't want to be on here. And I feel like vaguely, like it kind of is associated with my business, or I just kind of feel like it's going to keep me up to date or whatever. We need a couple exemplars out there of people who say, actually, things go just fine if you're not. So like if it is causing you harm, if you feel very uncomfortable about it, nothing really that bad happens for most people when they walk away. So that's why I don't do it.
Yeah. And I think for us, the overhead is an actual real overhead. Like we pay people to create these things and take up not just their time and their attention, but could we be working? What's the cost of this? Yeah. The opportunity cost of letting that go so that we can use that time to do fewer things.
Well, what do you think your audience would be in the counterfactual where, last time I was here in 2019, let's say I convinced you and you stopped all social outreach. Do you think your audience would be, half the growth you had? All the growth?
If you take away social media altogether, our podcast is listened to by roughly the same number of people. It's still a predominantly audio podcast. So then that calls into question, do we need a video version of the podcast?
Yeah.
Can we simplify that as well? Can we do fewer things?
Yeah. Right. And that's a tricky question. Like I do video now on the podcast because I have this rough sense that video is probably going to be the future just because people like to see other humans. Mm-hmm. And I don't think it's going to be, I hope it's not going to be, I'm kind of knocking on the wood here. I hope it's not going to be YouTube going on into the future, that this is the way we encounter video. I think that ecosystem is going to get more complicated. I think people want to see other people. So I think video is important. But yeah, this is a good question. Your podcast changes people's lives. And so what I love about podcasts is that, first of all, they're independent. You have a server somewhere these podcasts are hosted on. Anyone who wants can subscribe to your RSS feed with whatever player they want, and they can listen to this podcast. They grow by word of mouth. That's the main way podcast grows. People say, you got to listen to this show, you got to listen to this episode. I think it's like the best of what the internet offers, sort of democratic, independent media that reaches people through high quality word of mouth curation. This is what changes people's lives. Now, the social might bring more people into that.
Yeah.
But this is the thing that I think is really, people hear you every week again and again. That's what gets them that relationship with you and the ideas. That means 6 months later, a year later, they start making real changes, like in a way that no TikTok's ever going to really push them.
Well, and can we talk about that? So for the average person who's listening to this, it doesn't have a brand that distributes clips from their podcast. What is the case that we would state for them that it might make sense, it might be beneficial to walk away from social media?
Yeah, so what you want to do there is work backwards from the proverbial empty closet. So instead of looking at the social media you use and saying, well, which of these do I maybe not need, or maybe I should take a break from some of these, I suggest people take 30 days and temporarily step away from everything. Right. So that's what I mean by empty closet. Don't go into your crowded closet and just start trying to organize it. Do the Marie Kondo thing. We're going to empty this whole thing out. Spend 30 days not using these services, and instead very actively seeking through reflection and experimentation what you like. Like, what do I want to do? I want to go get books from the library or relearn how to knit or get back involved in trail running. Like, go out there and actually reflect and explore. And then after the 30 days are over, say, okay, I'm only going to add back into my closet here things that I'm now saying are going to make a huge difference in my life. They have to earn their way back into your life, which is the opposite that most people engage with these tools, which is, oh, I heard about this thing. Maybe I would get some value out of it. Let me try it out. And then they bring it into their life. And there it sits for the next 4 years, eating up an hour or two of their time every day. So start from scratch again and say, okay, what earns its way back in? So maybe you say TikTok's not earning its way back in. But you know what? Facebook groups is where I organize my trail running group or something. And so you get pretty clear about what's really adding value. Then, if you know why you're adding one of these services back into your life, you can put rules around it. So like, okay, the reason why Facebook earned its way back into my life is Facebook groups. Well, then why do I need my news feed? Mm-hmm. Why do I need to see my uncle's conspiracy theories about, Joe Biden? Why don't I now just use a plugin, access Facebook on my computer, newsfeed eradicator? All I see is the Facebook groups. Now I know why I'm using this. I can set up rules where I can get that value without the harm. So you go through that process, and it is a digital declutter. I don't call it a detox, a declutter. You're decluttering your digital life, leaving in only what, as Marie Kondo would say, sparks joy, the stuff that really matters. You got good rules around it. Most people, if they go through that, are going to have a drastically reduced set of apps on their phone. It's going to be different for different people. Most people probably won't end up with no social media. But what remains is going to be a lot less, and they're going to have these rules about it. Does it need to be on my phone? When do I use it? Should I protect it with plugins, etc.? Completely different engagement with these tools.
Two things. One, we might have the same uncle.
I think Facebook assigns one of them to you.
Yeah, I think so. But two, this is a tone that underlies much of your writing over the years, and that is this fearless willingness to experiment as a way of discovering what works.
Yeah.
And so much of what we do on social media carries a lot of weight where we feel like, oh, if I shut down Twitter for a while or I get off YouTube for a while, I might die. I might fade away into permanent irrelevance.
Yeah.
And you're saying you've got some room here to try something and it not work. You suffer a little bit of loss and you can live with that and endure that and come back stronger with the wisdom from that.
And one thing people often discover when they do this, because I ran an experiment back for that book, of 1,400 people went through this process. And one of the things a lot of them discovered is when you're temporarily away from that digital relevance, you start seeking in-person relevance. Mm. It's like relevance to real human beings that you know and around you. And then you rediscover, oh, this is what I really was missing. Oh, the digital, it was like eating a candy bar when you're hungry. It kind of satisfies the craving, but it's not what you really need. We rediscover, oh, this digital interactions was a simulacrum of what I really craved, which is what all humans crave, which is to serve and be connected to other people. And when you get connected to real people who live nearby you and you can see them and you're going there and you're helping them out and you're involved in things with them, you're sacrificing non-trivial time and attention on their behalf. The other stuff is, it starts tasting like ash in your mouth a little bit. Like you discover real food and you say, Cheetos are kind of weird. That happens to a lot of people, is that you realize, I want to be relevant, but this was a simulation of relevance. By the way, a simulation that a lot of people made a lot of money off of.
When I look at this entire landscape, I think the counter argument to this is I've actually gotten tremendous value from it personally. Take all the minimalist stuff out of it. But I think I've met most of the people in this room either directly or indirectly because of social media. Not you, obviously. Although, actually, that's not true. Someone shared something from your blog back in 2011, someone that I followed on Twitter at the time. Yeah. And that's how I originally connected with you. And then we met at a conference back then. And so even Cal Newport, I met him at least indirectly through social media. I met Professor Sean directly through Twitter. I've met a lot of close friends and loved ones, lovers even, because of social media, right? And so it's not all bad. That's not what we're saying here. I know that's not what you're suggesting. It seems to me what you're suggesting is that the benefits of not being on it are better for you than the benefits might be from being on it.
And also, when you realize why you're using a tool, it opens up other options. If you say, like maybe you go through this inventory and say, here's what I really care about and what these tools are serving is meeting interesting people I might not otherwise meet. Well, if okay, if that's my goal, what are all the different ways I can use the internet to be exposed to interesting people and meet interesting people? That might really actually change how you use those tools. So you're like, well, these 7 networks, well, why I'm not meeting one on TikTok. Okay, so I'm not going to use that. All right, I am kind of meeting people on here, but how am I meeting people on here? Well, it's really these corners of Twitter. So let me get rid of, unfollow all these other things. So all I'm seeing is these corners of Twitter where I meet people. Or maybe you realize, actually, there's an even better way to meet interesting people, and it's on a micro social media site, or it's in a newsletter community, or it's in a Patreon community for a podcast. Once I know what I'm looking for, then you can get really specific about how you engage in the tools. And you don't end up with this very real benefit justifying for some people hours every day, yelling at people, on the back of an app or doing weird dances and being convinced that they're going to be a superstar. Clarity really helps here.
I'm imagining someone whose concept of going out is tantamount to going to the bar and getting drunk. You can hear a person like that say, I hate going out. And you might think they really hate going out. But what they really mean is, I don't like going to the bar to get drunk. But if you introduce that person to a broader concept of what it means to go out, you can hang out with people at the coffee shop, you can take a walk at the park, you can go to the gym, then they might rediscover this love for engaging the world. In an analogous way, when you make that distinction between being online and being on social media, I think that's a simple but powerful distinction, because for many of us, being online is being on social media, because we don't typically go to Google anymore to search. We find new articles and new podcasts, and we read the news by going on our favorite social media sites. I'd love to hear you riff for a moment about what it can mean to be online in a constructive and recreational way without limiting that to social media. What can that look like?
I mean, some of my favorite people online are the readers of my newsletter and blog. They've been reading this for a long time. It's not a large group of people, so we kind of know each other. And they send comments back and forth, and the same sort of characters come up, and they'll email me, and you learn about a lot of interesting things. I have this address, for example, called interesting@calnewport.com, and I tell my readers and listeners, if there's something that's interesting, like an article or a book you think I might like, email it to me. And that's great. I get so many cool leads that way. Podcasts, I think, are fantastic because it's independent, right? Independently produced. And you have communities that grow around podcasts. I think that's more and more people are engaging in that. Any of sort of micro independent media production is something that I'm a fan of. We're seeing this with the written word now. So Substack has made it easier for writers who really have talent to sort of make a living or build a community around an email newsletter. The comments on those form their own community. People really know them. So I wrote this New Yorker piece last summer about this, right? About the alternatives to Twitter and Threads. And I talked about the user-generated independent web. And one of the examples I gave in that article was a forum for Washington Nationals baseball. And it's this forum that I would haunt, and I wrote about in the article. And I said, it's a forum. It's bulletin board posts. This is like 1996 technology. And they all know each other. And they watch the games together wherever they are, and they post live as the game unfolds. But as I was lurking on these boards, like writing this article, they would say, oh, hey, was your baby born? Or how was your trip to Arizona? And they all kind of know each other and they're having this discussion. It's like a sports bar where everyone there is interested and likes the same team that you likes, basically. That's cool use of the internet. Like these are people. And in that article, I contrasted this. I said, okay, this website, talknats.com. Let's compare that to Twitter. And we kind of went back and forth about like what the experience is. I was like, in the end, talksnat.com has everything we hope to get out of the internet, a way to connect to people who share interest, who I would not be able to find enough of them in my same town. So the internet brings people together. And Twitter is the worst of it because of the algorithmic manipulations needed to actually make that global conversation platform be functional is just all rancor and it's all going to make you feel bad. So I love the indie web. Independent, user-generated.
What do you say to the cynic who says, but Substack and YouTube, those are still social media platforms, right?
Well, so it depends. So, I mean, Substack, I think they want to do that. They're not yet, but they do want to do that. I mean, I would prefer people just do like what I did and just set up your own email provider, but the cost is too much in terms of money and in terms of complexity. So it's on that line. YouTube is also tricky. YouTube is tricky. Like I had to think a long time before we decided to post video. And because when I talked to my listeners about it, I said, look, there's two ways to use YouTube that I think are productive. And then there's a way to use YouTube that is really non-productive. The productive ways are as a cable service and a library. It's a great use of YouTube. I need to learn how to change the oil in a Honda Odyssey. Great. I can search for that and there'll be a video of it and I'll get that done. As a cable channel, I think is fine. Like I like the Minimalist. I know when they post their videos, it comes out on these days. I watch it on my smart TV. It's like a cable channel. It's just a source of more content. I think that's great too. The unproductive way is, okay, algorithm, I'm bored. Just start washing over like recommendations and people rabbit hole for hours. So it's like YouTube can work well if you have a plugin that blocks the auto recommendations. Now it's like a really cool cable service and library. You have to look up everything you want to watch. You're looking up specific things. You're only going to things you really like. You look at those recommendation bars, it becomes a whole different thing. And now it's, let me look at this video and then that video and then this video. And pretty soon it's a reaction to a Minecraft video where they're trying to recreate a Mr. Beast experiment while, Mark Rober shoots rockets at them, right? It just becomes this like weird algorithmic attention engineered whatever. So it gets tricky.
So your problem, and I think we'll talk about this later on our More About Less segment, but it sounds to me like your problem is more about the algorithm than anything else.
Yes.
Yeah, we'll touch more on that. We've got a sucky ads segment coming up. I'm going to hold that for the private pod. Real quick we're just getting started, by the way, y'all. We have a profusion of caller questions to answer over on the private podcast. But first, real quick for right here, right now, here's one thing that's going on in the life of the minimalist. Did you know you can hire the minimalist to speak? It's true. Well, we speak for free on the podcast, so you can check that out as well. But you can hire us to speak at your company, your college, your organization. The Minimalists have spoken a bunch of places: Harvard, Apple, Google, Allstate, South by Southwest. Never Georgetown yet, but maybe someday.
I'll fix that.
And we've spoken to hundreds of other organizations, schools, and conferences. We speak about a bunch of different topics, from simple living and decluttering to digital clutter, workplace minimalism, sustainable living, personal relationships, and living a meaningful life. If you're interested in hiring the Minimalist to speak at your organization or event, just head on over to theminimalists.com/speaking for more information. While you're there, you can also watch our speaking demo trailer. You can check that out. Alabama, what else you got for us?
Here's a minimalist insight from one of our listeners.
Hi, I am one of your minimalist subscribers, and I would like to share an experience I had with letting go. What I let go of was a Costco membership. My husband and I have so much anxiety anytime we go to Costco that really we only use it once or twice a year. They no longer carried some of our primary shipping supplies, which was a benefit to our business membership. When they recently changed their membership policies, which made it so whoever goes and uses your card has to only use one form of payment. So if my sister was there and I was present as me being the member, she could not run her credit card. I did the math, and the items that I run once or twice a year were simple items that I could get at a common grocery store. So that experience has taught me that I can even let go of a membership. The savings and gas and those few dollars a day, I can find a better way, closer and more cost effective, without causing me so much mental anguish. So for those who are looking at your memberships and think Costco is the only way, know that there are other ways. A lot of what I used to buy at Costco I actually get at Restaurant Depot, which anyone with a business license can do. So for those small-time business owners, you don't have to be in the restaurant business. There are other resources out there that can help you. And then you can be free of the Costco shackles. Not only that, but they gave me my entire premium back. I thought I was going to have it prorated. But I am so happy to say I finally let Costco go.
All right, y'all, we'll see you on Patreon for the full 2-hour Maximal edition of episode 435 with Cal Newport. That's the entire episode over there. We had a lot of fun with Cal Newport, and we answered a bunch more questions like, how can I reshape the values of my workplace using minimalist principles? How do I identify, avoid, and let go of information clutter? How can I organize my home in a way that calms the chaos in my life? Plus a million more questions over on the Minimalist Private Podcast. Visit patreon.com/theminimalist or click the link down in the description to subscribe and get your personal link so that our weekly Maximal episodes play in your favorite podcast app. You'll also gain access to all of our podcast archives all the way back to episode 001. By the way, Patreon is now offering free trials, so if you'd like to test drive our private podcast, you can join for 7 days for free. Big thanks to Cal Newport for joining us today. You can't follow him on social media, but you can check out his new book. It's called Slow Productivity. We'll put a link to that in the show notes. You can also find his podcast called Deep Questions and his website, his blog, calnewport.com. Links to all of that will be at theminimalists.com/podcast. That is our minimal episode for today. If you leave here with just one message, let it be this: love people and use things, because the opposite never works. Thanks for listening, y'all.
We'll see you next time.
Peace.
Every little thing you think that you need, every little thing you think that you need, every little thing that's just feeding your greed. Oh, I bet that you'd be fine without it.